good to be with you again. I always love when I'm invited to share my thoughts with you. It feels like an affirmation and an opportunity for me to settle myself and struggle with the scriptures and allow myself to share with you what comes out of that for me, and hopefully there will be something useful for you as well. It always seems to me that when I start to face a particular passage, I find myself having more questions than answers. And the readings today jumped out at me with, what does it mean to be rich towards God? What is that? So I wrestled with it all week. I'm not sure that I have easy answers, but I have a sense that God's inviting me and hopefully all of us to consider that question. Last couple of years have been full of so many challenges. I keep waiting for things to get easier. And I'm beginning to think that life today is a whole bunch like it was in first century Palestine. When Jesus appeared, the world was in turmoil. Palestine felt in danger at all times. The people were arguing about the end times being any day now, and looking for their Messiah to lead them out, and arguing about what was the right thing to believe and how to live their lives. Jews were fighting amongst themselves, and crosses lined the roads. It was clear to people what it meant when Jesus said, "Take up your cross and follow me." It meant being willing to die for what you knew was right and good. Today, there's lots of different interpretations of what it means to take up your cross. And there are those who think it has a very particular meaning on the right. And then there are those in progressive churches that continue to argue about it because we have so many different points of view about what that cross that Jesus died on represents for us. But in the first century, that cross was a symbol of the way of Jesus, how he lived his life and what he invited people to do, which would likely lead to them being in conflict with empire. I have all this written down and I'm not following it at all, so I'm just trying to find my way. So once again, what does it mean to be rich towards God? Does it mean sacrificing all that I have to feed the poor and becoming the blessed poor myself? Well, Jesus and his disciples were itinerant preachers, and they depended on other people to take care of them. But Mary Magdalene was an independent woman with her own resources who helped support the disciples. And most of the early churches were founded in people's houses. They were little house churches where people gathered in small groups, kind of like this, and shared what they were learning about the challenges of being followers of Jesus's way. His challenge to love unconditionally, to live in a life of compassion. For me, the church has always been a place where I go to be challenged to grow into the example that Jesus led for us. And it is one of the reasons I've always loved this little church, because you are examples to me. I have stories I can tell for years about the ways that you inspired me in my early days and continue to inspire me. One of your pastors, actually my mentor when I was in seminary, wrote the official book on the value of being a small church. And I love that that is who we are. But again, what does it mean to be rich towards God? It asks us to put our love of God and our neighbor and ourselves first in our lives. It brings us back to the powerful words of Micah 6. Most of us are familiar with the last lines, to love God, to love your neighbor. No, that's not the last lines. To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. That we have songs about. I'm sure we have some of those songs. But what comes before helps you to see that Michael was living in a time where abundance was held in the hands of the rich, with thousands of rams, 10,000s of rivers of oil. And here we are struggling with inflation to have enough food on the table and to buy gasoline. Some things never change. But what does it mean to live the love that God has given us? That has been the question. And this week, the dear friend I've been asking for prayers for, he's taken a major turn for the worse. And I always go visit him on Thursdays, and we go out for lunch, and we couldn't really get out to go out for lunch, and I have no food in the house. So I went shopping and bought him food. And then his daughter called me the next morning and said she'd been trying to get a hold of him for the last 12 hours. So evidently right after I left, he took a fall and couldn't get him. And she called the paramedics to do a wellness check. They picked him up, sat him in a chair, and he refused to go to the hospital where he desperately needed to go. And the next morning when I went to check in on him, he was also unable to answer the phone. So I went to the house and found him on the floor. He had probably at this point done 48 hours on the floor with no food. I called the paramedics and said, "You're going to the hospital." And he said, "Why? I'm fine." It would have been funny if it weren't so sad because he's in desperate straits. But I'm a pushy broad. I don't know if you're noticed about me. And I managed to get him to the hospital, and he is currently being treated for extreme heart failure, dehydration, not taking his meds for a week. And so that's what I've been up to for the last 48 hours. And I came here to share the good news with you about how God works. How is God rich towards each of us in our own challenging situations? Which reminded me as I wrote this sort of halfway through this little challenge this week, and I remembered way back when, must have been 25 years ago, when I was an intern, you had a member who was caustic and difficult. And I choose not to remember her name, but there were at least 4 of you who took care of her at the end of her life. And I was in such awe of your patience and your kindness and your determination to make sure even a difficult person was cared for. And I know that even now, many of you struggle with extended family or your own challenges, and knowing that this community cares is a huge part of being rich towards God. One of my greatest sadnesses about the wider church, so often they're always counting numbers and worried that they're not growing, but they're also not aware of how much they already have. And their children would do really well if they only show up. Because children are nurtured by all the grandmothers and extended family that our church provides. And I know that the children I've seen grow up in churches have a kind of stability and strength that you just can't get anywhere else. Because if you're in school, you may have teachers who like you or don't like you, but it's all based on your accomplishments. And your own family, they're kind of saying, well, we have dreams for you. We want you to succeed and we love you, but, go in the right direction. Whereas a church, oh my God, if you just show up, you are wonderful. And that communicates really clearly. This church has been that kind of place for me. And for my children, who I can't get to come back, so I have no one to talk. But at any rate, I digress. Learning to be rich towards God has something to do with this community. And as I've been struggling through all of these daily challenges, a girlfriend of mine shared with me the wise words of Charlie Chaplin on his 70th birthday. You may have heard these before, but I needed to hear them again, and so I'm going to share them with you. It gives structure to my life to have wise words thrown at me that I can wrestle with. And he said, as I began to love myself, I found that anguish and emotional suffering are only warning signs that I was living against my own truth. Today, I know this is authenticity. As an aside, when I forget that God is in the midst of all that I am trying to do, I lose my center and feel resentful, which prevents me from experiencing these challenges as gifts. But he goes on. As I begin to love myself, I understood how much I can afford. As I began to love myself, I understood how much it can offend someone as I try to force my desires on this person, even though I knew the time was not right and the person was not ready for it, and even though the person might be me. Today, I call this respect. And respecting my friend who refused to get off the floor has been a deep challenge. As I began to love myself, I stopped craving for a different life. And I could see that everything that surrounded me was inviting me to grow. Today, I call it maturity. And it's getting ready. As I began to love myself, I understood that in any circumstance, I am in the right place, at the right time, and everything happens at the exactly right moment, so I can be calm. Today, I call this self-confidence. As I began to love myself, I quit stealing my own time. I stopped designing huge projects for the future. Today, I only do what brings me joy and happiness, things I love to do and that make my heart cheer. I do them my own way and in my own rhythm, and today I call that simplicity. This is a goal. As I began to love myself, I freed myself of anything that is no good for my health. Food, people, things, situations, and everything that draws me down and away from myself. At first, I called this attitude a healthy egotism. Today, I know it is love for myself. It doesn't mean turning away from challenging people. It means turning towards the values that sustain me: kindness, compassion, respect. As I began to love myself, I quit trying to always be right. And ever since, I was wrong less of the time. Today, I discovered this as modesty. Who would have guessed? As I began to love myself, I refused to go on living in the past and worrying about the future. Now I only live for the moment where everything is happening. Today I live each day, day by day, and I call it fulfillment. Magnificent. As I begin to love myself, I recognize that my mind can disturb me and it can make me sick. As I connected it to my heart, my mind became a valuable ally. Today, I call this connection wisdom of the heart. And this was a real goal for me because I'm an overthinker. I'm always thinking about should I, what I could have, and how do I make that better, and what did I do wrong, and oh, let me go off on that tangent. And learning to come back to where God lives within me and around me, reminding me that I'm who I need to be, where I need to be. As I began to love myself, I realized we no longer need to fear arguments, confrontations, or any kind of problems with ourselves or others. Even stars collide, and out of their crashing new worlds are born. Today, I call this life. One more biblical passage before I let you go. Be ye perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Oh, have I hated that one. Until I learned that the Greek word we translate as perfect actually it really means wholeness. Be whole, as your heavenly Father, Mother, sister, brother, God is whole. Everything in creation is complicated, some of it's difficult, some of it's challenging, and it's all part of God's magnificent universe. And we are a part of it in all our messiness. And learning that it is good for me to be fully who I am. And for each of us to be fully who we are. So I can let go of my constant thinking I need to improve and be a better caretaker and a more compassionate person. I am doing the best I can. And God whispers, it is enough. And so are you. May it be so.